What is Jewish music?
Mary, light my mind.
Is that Jewish music?
Well, what is Jewish music?
Check it out.
It started out from this thing of trying to reduce the language down to a few cries. Was the thing when Schoenberg wrote about Webern's Six Bagatelles for string quartet, and he said that what Webern did was reduce a whole novel into a single sigh. So it was like we were trying to reduce a whole ethnic group into a single cry. One little pathetic cry. But we started out that it actually, you could hear it like being like klezmer. Yeah, da, 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 da. But by now, then after that, it was like I didn't want to be stuck with that. So gradually it just turned into without all the da 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 before it, just the alone, just the and then we tried to build a language out of that. We tried to build a language, but that's where it comes from. In its primordial roots, it's extremely based. It couldn't exist without the Jewish music and without the Jewish culture.
It becomes a different form of expression, but it's rooted in the understanding of what the music is, what it's supposed to do, and certainly rooted in the emotional quality of the music. So like I say, I can take tune A and play it very traditionally, or play it in a whole other type of setting. And for me, both are valid. Still, there's always the question of how much you can mess with the tradition that you inherited, and that's really, you have responsibility to. And keep the music alive, have it say what it's supposed to do.
Traditional klezmer doina. Traditional is a complicated word. Tradition is moving on now. We are making a new tradition now. Those of us who the tradition is moving along, but this would be, say, a doina. You could hear something like that, say, in the 1920s or 30s or 40s, a doina that might sound like that. Now I might take that same kind of melody, and instead of, all right, go. Something like that.
There's something still in the oral image which does correspond to what we imagine Jewish music to sound like in terms of scales. And I've tried to have it be just almost like the way you can, there's such a thing as a blues guitar sound, like you're, and you don't need to hear more. You don't need to hear the whole 12 bars to feel the blues. There's a kind of sound of a cry, what people call the cry of jazz or the cry of blues. So it's more like trying to distill Jewish music in that sense. I wouldn't say it's my only intention in Self-Haters. I mean, basically, I'm doing the music which matters to me, which I kind of am a certain very reduced, very distilled language that I would believe in, I think, even if I wasn't Jewish or whatever. But at the same time, I can't say that the Jewish tropes are not essential to it. I think that they're really essential. I think they're really central. I hear them. If somebody doesn't hear them and likes the music, this is also fine. If somebody doesn't hear them and hates the music, I guess this is fine also. If somebody does hear them and it doesn't make any difference, they still hate the music, I guess this is also fine.
Word Großstadtmusik was almost always in the articles. Now that's very interesting because, in fact, although klezmer is now being constructed as folk music, before the war, it was called, well, in Hungary, for example, it was called urbanisch, urban music. It was seen as like another variety of jazz. It was distinctly thought of as what was not Volk. It was what was not the Volk music. It was big city music.
In its essence, all this music is a spiritual form of music used for religious reasons or as a form of worship. by and large, klezmer music is really taken out of context nowadays. It's difficult for people, if they're not in a traditional community, to understand the context of the music and what its function is. And it becomes sort of an isolated part out of a whole picture. But it's difficult for people to really understand what the whole picture is. Many different, cultural examples of different traditional Jewish societies, and just amongst the East European Jews, you have many, many different cultural manifestations of the same thing, but in different guise, different dress. But I think unless it's connected to the Torah, it's not going to have that much longevity. And I think that history really bears that out very dramatically. I think if anyone with an open mind will look at various movements in Judaism over the last 2,000 years, most of the movements that were, or all the movements that were basically not attached to Torah, wound up basically being not Jewish and becoming something else.
I think that it's a very personal thing to make a statement, klezmer music has to be connected to religion. I think that's personal for each person. I think that certainly that issue has come up in my mind. I play klezmer music and I go, wow, it leads there somehow. It leads there. I guess what it leads to is, what does it mean to be Jewish? And then so one starts to ask the question, like, well, does it mean, is it totally meaningless without the religion?
Jews have a particular relation to defining themselves because they're always in a culture and outside. Like, say, like black people, they never can not be black. It's obvious that they're black, and it really depends on what is the attitude of the dominant culture where they are, how well it works, But like Jews, it's like, what makes a Jew a Jew? It's like something that fascinates people. People are always saying like, but you're not religious, so why do you even put the yoke on yourself? You could just groove. I mean, it's like, and I just think, well, what the hell is that supposed to mean?
Jewish musics of any given place are always related to the non-Jewish musics of that same place. American klezmer is related to American non-klezmer. So this is Bellamy who's playing rye trumpet, and in my head, the way I might develop a musical form is to listen to, say, Sammy from the Maghreb singing the Jewish text and a related non-Jewish trumpet music from the same region, and then try to figure out a way of kind of creating some sort of organic synchronicity between these two things, and of course myself being the third thing, being who I am in my experience. So I mean, I'm just messing around, but it's a matter of finding the sound, the articulation, the ornamentation that'll work, and then matching it with the text. I'm studying the Haggadah for the text of this, which will, I don't know. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I do approach all these musics as very much on a musical level. The fact of their Jewish content is often as a separate aside from the musical content. And the study of this is, I try to do as scientifically as possible. Whether this cultural side of Judaism, which now seems to exist separate from religious Judaism and has its own history and tradition and yichus, separate from the religion, whether it could have ever developed absent of the religious Jewish life in the Pale in East Europe, even though it was in many ways a rejection of the religious life, if it could have ever been formed without that. And the corollary that I wonder about is, it exists now, but will it continue to have a life of its own absent of the religious side? Judaism, we respect that that groups of people who live like insular will develop their own traditions. The tide of tradition is used as a conservative force, perhaps in a good sense, of keeping things relatively tied back to ancient forms. But one realizes, and the tradition, the bigger Jewish tradition, realizes that we here for 500 years in America are inevitably going to do something different than those people who have been 2,000 years in Iran, even though we're coming from the same source.
There's always this conflict between like feeling really assimilated and feeling like this completely white bread person, totally flat, who's just taking in imagery from all over the place and could come from anywhere. Could come from Indonesia, could come from Africa, could come from television, could come from Anton von Webern or wherever. And at the same time, like looking for some kind of identity focus that you can say, well, that's me and I belong to a group. This look for this searching for belonging, right? That's to me very Jewish.
After that, Moses discoursed on the Torah, revealing such secrets as Reb Elimelech had never dreamed of. The assembled company listened attentively, their faces bathed in light.
Memories light the corners of my mind. Such an exclusive address ultimately obscures the necessity of mapping out a space in which Jew was native, not a stranger, but an absolute inhabitant of time and place. The urgency of reiterating not only the memory, but the possibility of such a world can be felt most acutely now upon the present scene, where the political context of the people of the book has undergone a radical transformation, while the terms used to record and interpret their history and culture have not only remained static, but even regressed into a kind of fixed, iconic solidity.
Liebe Menschen am Asalef in noch in
Of this tradition that resonate with me poetically. There are certain parts of this tradition that resonate with me philosophically. And I don't give a damn about acting like a Jew. Okay? I don't want to act like a Jew. I'm interested in enacting what I find poetic and what resonates philosophically.
What's interesting is that you have all these downtown artists who are, for whatever reason, whether, I don't know, whether it's has to do with trendiness, whether it's part of their personal search. You have all these downtown artists who are choosing to identify themselves as Jewish and identify their art as Jewish. That's a very interesting thing. That's, in a sense, I think at its, on one aspect of it is trying to reclaim that Jewish identity, that cultural identity, and saying, we're downtown, we're hip, and we're Jewish. And that's a great deal of what we have to, what informs who we are.
We're living in a society where Jews are really divorced from their own heritage for a number of reasons. And I think that just the fact that people who have no positive identification with anything Jewish, just the fact that they'll hear a Jewish melody and feel good about it, or play a Jewish melody and feel good about it, is a real blessing. Where that goes, I don't know, but I think just the fact that they identify positively with something Jewish, be it music or art or something, and it makes them feel Jewish and enhances their own sense of Jewishness, I think that's a brucha. It's a wonderful thing. Then the question is whether or not that person is motivated to explore it further or not, and that's really an individual choice, and that's for everyone themselves to decide.
I think that there's something like fundamental about one's identity. I mean, in that sense, you look at a Jewish person thinking, or a Jewish person writing, or a Jewish person making music. there's something fundamentally Jewish about their work because there is, just because there is to start with.
Identity it's very tricky stuff. Where does it come from? Does it come from memory? You know, I mean, I'll go back to talking about this guitar. Does it come from, you know, you read in a book that your ancestors did this or that, sang this song or that song? Does it come from, for people like many of us who don't have memory, does it come from desire, from what you want, what you need? I tend towards the first and the last of those things as a source of what I play. I try to tend towards the first and the last of those things as a source of what I play. And, you know, I mean, otherwise, things can get very confusing. These categories of music are not absolute things. It's not like a tree or a fire hydrant. The interesting question is, who seeks to be included in a tradition or a label, and why? Who seeks to deny that inclusion, and why?
You feel about certain people that they're fundamentally Jewish, but you can't quite say why. You can't. There's a certain kind of what people like to call Talmudic way of asking questions without looking for answers. There's a certain kind of messianic belief in your own thinking and recognition that others might not share it.